The rain beat hard against the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria in Florence on that October night of 1512. In the shadows of the marble corridors, a man silently watched the collapse of everything he had built. Niccolò Machiavelli did not know he was about to discover the darkest secrets of human nature and power, secrets that would forever change the way we understand manipulation, loyalty, and survival in the deadly game of politics. What happened during those obscure days of Florentine winter remained hidden for centuries, but now through secret letters recently discovered in the Vatican archives, the true story can finally be told. A story that reveals how a broken and humiliated man developed the most cruel and effective strategies to win back not only power, but the respect he had lost. Machiavelli had fallen, the Medici family had returned to power, and his position as Secretary of the Second Chancellery had been brutally ripped from his hands. For 14 years, he had served the Republic of Florence with a devotion bordering on obsession. He had negotiated with kings, manipulated alliances, and orchestrated military strategies that saved his native city countless times. But none of that mattered now. The morning after his dismissal, Niccolò walked the streets of Florence like a ghost. Merchants who once bowed respectfully in his presence now looked away. Nobles who once competed for his attention at lavish banquets crossed to the other side of the street. So, a matter of hours, he had become invisible. Worse than that, he had become irrelevant. But something happened in that moment of absolute humiliation that would change everything. As he watched a beggar being expelled from a tavern for not being able to pay for his drink, Machiavelli had a dark revelation. The beggar pleaded, humiliated himself, promised to work in exchange for crumbs, and the more he begged, the more scorn he received. Compassion had turned into disgust. Vulnerability had become weakness. That night, in his villa in Sant'Andrea, Machiavelli began to write. They were not merely political reflections. They were the intimate confessions of a man who had discovered the cruelest truth about human nature. Respect is never given, it is taken. The first pages of The Prince did not contain abstract theories about governance. They were brutally practical strategies about how a man can rebuild his reputation and power when everything is lost. Every word was infused with the pain of his own downfall and the thirst for revenge that grew in his chest like a malignant tumor. For months, Machiavelli studied the powerful men he had known. Cesare Borgia, the bastard son of Pope Alexander VI, had conquered entire territories through a lethal combination of charm and cruelty. When he negotiated, he never showed need. When he threatened, he never bluffed. When he promised, he always delivered, both the rewards and the punishments. The first lesson was clear: never beg. Begging is admitting weakness, and weakness in the minds of men is contagious. They avoid the weak as they avoid the sick, fearing that misfortune can be transmitted. But Machiavelli discovered something even more disturbing. In his secret notes, he revealed that he had tested his theories first in his own home. His wife, Marietta, who once consoled him with kind words about his downfall, began to be treated with calculated coldness. When she asked for attention, he was indifferent. When she offered support, he rejected it with apparent disdain. The result was devastating and effective. Within weeks, Marietta began to desperately seek his approval. The dynamic had completely reversed. She, who once saw him as a defeated man, now saw him as mysterious, distant, powerful. The same man who had lost the respect of an entire city was regaining respect in his own home through the darkest strategy of all: strategic indifference. The secret letters reveal moments of deep, personal anguish. "Today I saw fear in Marietta's eyes," he wrote on a winter night. "The same fear I used to feel when begging the Medici for crumbs of consideration. Have I become the monster I swore to fight? Or have we always all been monsters, merely pretending to be civilized men?" The second strategy emerged from an even darker observation. Machiavelli realized that men respect not those who are good to them, but those who could be dangerous if provoked. Respect is born of fear, not gratitude. Gratitude is forgotten over time. Fear is eternal. During the winter of 1513, he began implementing this philosophy in his social interactions. When creditors came to collect his debts, instead of pleading for more time, Machiavelli received them with glacial calm. He spoke softly, forcing them to lean in to hear him. His eyes remained fixed on theirs until they looked away first. Then, With a voice carrying unspoken promises of terrible consequences, he said, "You will receive what you are owed," at the appropriate moment. The effect was immediate and disturbing. Men who had arrived demanding payment left apologizing for the inconvenience, not because Machiavelli had money, he remained bankrupt, but because something in his presence had changed. He no longer emitted the frequency of despair, he emitted the frequency of controlled danger. If this story has already struck you so far, don't forget to leave your like. This helps the channel continue revealing secrets that many prefer to hide. The first turning point in Machiavelli's dark journey came when Lorenzo de' Medici, grandson of the famous Lorenzo the Magnificent, requested a private audience with him. The secret letters reveal this was no coincidence. Machiavelli had orchestrated this meeting through a complex network of psychological manipulation that lasted months. First, he planted seeds of curiosity about his new political theories through carefully selected intermediaries. He never spoke directly about his work, but always, in such a way that the information reached the right ears at the right time. When questioned directly, he responded with riddles that left more questions than answers. "A wise man," he said, "never reveals his secrets to those who have no power to implement them." The phrase reached Lorenzo's ears as an irresistible provocation. Who was this fallen man to suggest that a Medici did not have enough power? On the night of the meeting, something extraordinary happened. Lorenzo, used to being courted by flatterers and supplicants, found in Machiavelli something completely different. A man who asked for nothing, offered nothing, and, more disturbingly, seemed to need nothing. "I've heard you've developed interesting theories about power," said Lorenzo, trying to sound casual. Machiavelli remained silent for long seconds, his eyes studying the young Medici like a predator studies its prey. Finally, with a voice carrying centuries of bitter wisdom, he replied, "I have not developed theories. I have discovered truths. Truths that most men prefer to ignore because they are too disturbing for delicate minds." Lorenzo felt something he hadn't felt in years, genuine curiosity mixed with a tinge of fear. This broken man had somehow managed to make a Medici feel small without uttering a single offensive word. "And what truths are those?" asked Lorenzo, realizing too late he had fallen into a psychological trap. By asking the question, he had admitted that Machiavelli possessed something he desired. "The first truth," said Machiavelli, rising slowly and walking to the window, "is that power is not won by men who beg for it. It is taken by men whom others fear losing it to." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Lorenzo understood he was not dealing with a humiliated subject seeking favor. He was facing a strategist who had turned his own defeat into a lethal weapon. "Go on," murmured Lorenzo, and at that moment, both knew the dynamic had changed forever. Machiavelli continued, now completely controlling the rhythm of the conversation. "The second truth is that men only respect those who show they can survive without them. Dependence breeds contempt. Independence breeds fascination." For the following hours, Machiavelli revealed to Lorenzo strategies that went far beyond traditional politics. He spoke of human psychology, of how men make decisions based on primitive emotions disguised as rational logic. He explained how the perception of power is more important than real power, and how that perception can be manipulated through precise techniques of nonverbal communication. "When you want something from someone," Machiavelli explained, "never show that you need it. Instead, make them feel they need to prove their worth to you. The man who chases is always inferior to the man who is chased." Lorenzo was completely fascinated. Here was knowledge no tutor had ever taught him, no book had ever revealed. It was wisdom forged in the pain of humiliation and tempered in the fire of survival. But the second turning point was coming, and it was darker than anything Lorenzo could have imagined. In the weeks following the meeting, Machiavelli was gradually readmitted into Florence's circles of power, not as a supplicant, but as a consultant whose advice was sought with growing anxiety. His strategy had worked perfectly. By refusing to beg for his old position, he had created an even more powerful new one, that of a man whose knowledge was considered indispensable. But the secret letters reveal that a much deeper plan was at play. Machiavelli was not merely regaining power, he was conducting a large-scale psychological experiment, using the entire city of Florence as his laboratory. Every piece of advice he gave, every strategy he proposed, every word he uttered was being carefully documented. He was mapping human reactions to power, manipulation, and fear with the precision of a scientist studying insects. Men, he wrote in and his private notes, are simpler creatures than they would like to admit. They respond to basic stimuli with the predictability of trained animals. The secret is not to discover what motivates them, but how to make them believe their reactions are free and rational choices. The most disturbing revelation came when Machiavelli began applying his discoveries not only to regain power, but to completely control the people around him. He had discovered that true domination does not come from making others obey his orders. It comes from making them want to obey. Lorenzo de' Medici, without realizing it, had become the first subject in this new psychological kingdom. In the letters, Machiavelli describes in cold detail how he manipulated the young Lorenzo into becoming completely dependent on his advice, not through flattery or pleading, but through a far more sophisticated strategy, making Lorenzo believe he had discovered Machiavelli's genius on his own. "I planted the seeds," Machiavelli wrote, "but I made Lorenzo believe he watered and nurtured them. Now he defends my ideas more fervently than I do myself, because he believes they are, at least partially, his own creations." The technique was diabolical in its simplicity. During their conversations, Machiavelli presented complex problems and then guided Lorenzo through a series of seemingly innocent questions. Each question was formulated in such a way that it led Lorenzo to a specific conclusion, but always in a way that made the young Medici believe he had arrived there by his own brilliant reasoning. "The true art of manipulation," Machiavelli noted, "is not in forcing someone to do what you want. It is in making them want to do what you want, and believe the idea was theirs." But the darkest aspect of the experiment was only beginning to reveal itself. Machiavelli had realized that his techniques worked not only with individuals, but with entire groups. He began applying similar principles to Florentine politics, manipulating entire factions through a lethal combination of mass psychology and individual strategy. During the summer of 1514, a series of coincidences began to occur in Florence. Merchants who opposed the Medici's policies began to face mysteriously synchronized troubles. Their suppliers delayed deliveries. Their clients cancelled orders. Their reputations were stained by rumors whispered at precise moments. Nothing could be traced directly back to Machiavelli. Officially, he was just a consultant offering opinions on general political matters. But his private notes reveal a network of influence that stretched across the city like an invisible web. "Today," he wrote in July 1514, "Giovanni Tornabuoni finally bowed, not because I threatened him directly, but because I created circumstances in which bowing seemed the only logical option. He even thanked me for the advice that led him to make the decision I wanted him to make from the beginning." The strategy was simple in concept, but terrifyingly effective in execution. Machiavelli identified what each person most feared losing, then created situations in which that loss seemed imminent. He then offered a solution that protected exactly what the person feared losing, but only if they acted as he desired. "Fear," he observed, "is a far more powerful motivator than hope. A man who hopes to gain something may change his mind. A man who fears losing something he already has rarely hesitates to act." But it was during this period of apparent triumph that Machiavelli's true dark nature began to emerge in disturbing ways. The letters reveal moments of deep reflection on what he had become. "This morning," he wrote in a letter that remained sealed for 5 centuries, "I looked in the mirror and did not recognize the man staring back. When I began this path, I believed I was reclaiming my stolen dignity. Now I realize I may have sold my soul to buy something not worth the price I paid." The human vulnerability behind the Machiavellian mask became evident in moments like this. He was a man haunted by his own efficiency in manipulating other human beings. The power he had regained came accompanied by a deep and corrosive loneliness. "Marietta now looks at me with a mixture of fear and admiration that makes me feel more isolated than when I was merely a fallen man," he confessed. "I won the respect I so deeply desired, but I lost something far more precious in the process, the ability to inspire genuine love." This vulnerability, however, did not make him retreat. Instead, it turned into an even deadlier weapon. Machiavelli learned to use his own pain as fuel for an ambition that transcended any specific political goal. He no longer merely wanted power, he wanted total control over human nature itself. The darkest moment of his transformation came when he decided to test his theories on his own family. His letters describe in disturbing detail how he manipulated his own children to compete for his approval, using psychological reinforcement techniques that made them constantly question their own worth. If my theories about human nature are correct, he reasoned, they must work even with those who love me unconditionally. If they work with my children, they will work with anyone. The experiment was a terrible success. Within months, his children had become extensions of his will, desperately seeking signs of paternal approval that he dispensed with calculated parsimony. He had turned filial love into a tool of control. But it was at that moment of apparent absolute triumph over human psychology that the third and most devastating turning point occurred. One morning in September 1515, Machiavelli received an unexpected visit from Francesco Vettori, an old friend who had remained loyal even during his darkest days. Francesco brought with him a document that would change everything, a copy of Machiavelli's own private letters, which had been intercepted and studied by a secret network of Florentine intellectuals. "You thought you were conducting experiments," said Francesco, his voice heavy with deep sorrow. "But you were the experiment, Niccolo. We were observing, documenting, learning from you." The revelation was like a dagger to the heart of a man who believed he controlled every thread of conspiracy. Machiavelli discovered that while he manipulated others, he himself was being studied by a secret society of philosophers and strategists who saw in him the perfect example of how power corrupts absolutely. "Your techniques are brilliant," Francesco continued, "but you have become a monster, Niccolo, and we needed to understand how this happens, how a man of principles turns into what you have become." The intercepted letters revealed not only his strategies, but also his most intimate moments of doubt and self-questioning. Every word he had confided to paper in moments of vulnerability had been analyzed, categorized, and studied as symptoms of a contagious psychological disease, the absolute thirst for control. "You wanted to stop begging and start imposing respect," said Francesco, "but in the process, you lost the ability to feel anything other than the cold pleasure of domination." Machiavelli felt something he hadn't felt in years: true terror, not the calculated fear he wielded as a tool, but the primal terror of a man realizing he was completely lost in the labyrinth of his own ambition. "Why?" he managed to whisper. "Because we needed to." "No," Francesco replied. "If the techniques you developed can turn a good man into an efficient monster, we need to understand this process, to protect ourselves and to protect others." The secret society had spent years studying not only Machiavelli's strategies, but their psychological effects both on him and on his victims. They documented every phase of his transformation, from the initial humiliation to the thirst for revenge, from the discovery of the power of indifference to the complete dehumanization of everyone around him. "Your strategies work," admitted Francesco. "They work terribly well, but they kill something essential in the man who uses them, and we needed to confirm this before others began to follow your example." At that moment, Machiavelli understood the bitter irony of his situation. He had become the perfect example of his own theories. He had managed to stop begging and had begun to impose respect. But in the process, he had lost his humanity, and now he discovered that even that loss had been observed, documented, and studied by others. "What will you do with this information?" he asked, his voice heavy with a bitterness that transcended anything he had ever felt before. "We will keep it," said Francesco, "so that future generations may understand the true cost of absolute power. You have become a case study, Niccolo, a warning about the dangers of fully embracing the philosophy of power for power's sake." The following years were the darkest of Machiavelli's life. He continued to use his techniques. They were too effective to abandon, but now with the disturbing awareness that each success distanced him further from his original humanity. His final letters reveal a man haunted by his own abilities. "I created a monster," he wrote a few months before his death, "and that monster is me. I achieved everything I wanted: respect, power, influence. But I discovered that a man who can no longer feel genuine love has won only an empty victory." The last letter, written days before his death in 1527, contains a confession that remained secret until today. "If I could go back, I would choose humiliation over the loneliness I conquered." A man who begs may still feel hope. A man who only imposes respect feels only the cold echo of his own voice. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation in the letters is the discovery that Machiavelli, even realizing the price of his choices, continued to use his techniques until the end. He had become addicted to the power of controlling others, even knowing that this control was consuming him from the inside out. "The strategies I developed," he wrote, "are like a poison that is also a remedy. They cure weakness, but kill the soul. And once you taste this poison, you discover you can no longer live without it." His death in June 1527 was surrounded by strange rumors. Some say that in his final moments, he murmured words interpreted differently by those present. Some heard a plea for forgiveness. Others a final instruction on how to manipulate even death itself to leave a lasting impression. The truth, revealed in the secret letters, is even more disturbing. Machiavelli had planned his own death as the last lesson on power. He knew he would die soon and carefully orchestrated the circumstances so that his death would become yet another demonstration of his theories on controlling perception. "Even in death," he wrote in his last letter, "a man can choose between begging for mercy or imposing respect through the way he faces the inevitable. I choose to die as I have lived in recent years, asking nothing of anyone." And thus died Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who turned his own humiliation into the darkest and most effective philosophy of power ever conceived. His techniques outlived him, passed down from generation to generation through secret circles of power, influencing political, business, and military leaders to this day. But the question, his secret letters, leave hanging is more disturbing than any specific strategy. Is it possible to stop begging and start imposing respect without completely losing one's soul in the process? Or is the price of respect won through fear always the gradual death of everything that makes us truly human? The letters suggest that Machiavelli believed there was a third option, a synthesis between weakness and monstrosity. But he died before discovering what that option was, or perhaps he discovered it, but chose to take that secret to the grave as one last demonstration of power over those who would come after him. Today, 5 centuries later, Machiavelli's strategies continue to be used in boardrooms, political offices, and personal relationships around the world. People who have never heard of the prince intuitively apply techniques he documented: strategic indifference, artificial scarcity, the use of fear as a tool of respect. But how many of these modern practitioners of Machiavellian philosophy realize the price they are paying? How many can see that by stopping to beg and starting to impose respect, they may be beginning the same gradual process of dehumanization that consumed their original creator? Machiavelli's secret letters leave us with one last disturbing reflection. Perhaps the true dark strategy is not merely about how to gain power, but about how to keep one's humanity while exercising it. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson he never fully managed to learn. The power to stop begging and start imposing respect exists. The techniques work. But the final question remains: are you willing to pay the price? And more importantly, would you even recognize when you have already paid too much? And now tell me, would you have done the same in his place? Write your answer in the comments, and if this story intrigued you, click on the video now appearing on your screen, because there you will discover even darker secrets about hidden power.